Do you need a divorce lawyer in Colorado? That's the question we're going to focus on in today's divorce legal Q&A. If you don't know me yet, I'm Rachael Sloan. I'm a relationship coach and I focus on supporting men after divorce. And joining me today is Kelly Snodgrass. She is the managing attorney at Snodgrass Family Law and Mediation, and she has lots of experience in all aspects of divorce in Colorado. So Kelly, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's just jump right in. What do you think? Do you need a divorce lawyer in Colorado, or can people do it on their own?
Well, I think the answer is both. There are certain situations where people can navigate the process and go through the divorce on their own. The court's website has a ton of information to help people figure out the process and go through it. That said, if you have children, if you have a contested divorce, if you own a business or have any type of assets, including a home, retirement accounts, it really is in your best interest to, at a minimum, consult with an attorney about what your rights and obligations are, how the process works, and make sure that there's nothing that you are missing.
Okay, so really only if you have a super simple divorce, no kids involved, no assets, then you can kind of just go to the court website, do it on your own, but everyone else really should have a little legal advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Kelly, can you walk us through what are the options available to people who want to get divorced in Colorado? How can you do it?
Yeah, sure. So I would say the best place to start if you are wanting information is actually the court's website. They do have instructions, they have forms, but what I find is that it's really overwhelming. I mean, people are going through a lot anyway, and then trying to go into a court process, formal, it can be really overwhelming. So that's the best place to start. And then, if you are feeling overwhelmed, there are certainly most courthouses offer a pro se clinic where an attorney will volunteer their time to help answer questions. What you get from that is really limited. That's really just about them helping you fill out the initial form. They're not going to be giving you any information specific to your case, really. So the best thing to do is to talk to an attorney. Most attorneys offer a number of representation options, including myself. So obviously attorneys will do a full representation so that they can, handle everything for you from filling out paperwork, filing, answering all your questions, getting everything together. But most offer unbundled services or consulting. So if you need help with a specific question, a specific issue, they can help you with just that one thing. And one thing that I do is consulting work where I help people sort of behind the scenes. So they manage the case themselves, but I'm available to help answer questions, review documents. I can attend mediation or help them negotiate a settlement. I just don't go to court with them.
Okay. So, and it sounds like, Kelly, with that consultation, it could be kind of a huge range of services, right? Like I could have you kind of managing behind the scenes my whole divorce, or I could just come in and be like, Kelly, I need an hour of your time. I have no idea what do I do with this house, or, do you get people coming just for like kind of one-off?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. And I mean, I would say pretty much 100% of the time, the people that come in to see me, just to get information and have an initial consultation, if that's really all they were needing was to understand, again, their rights and obligations, how the process works, they always leave feeling like so relieved, so much better, and much more like they can handle it. So I definitely do, just that initial consultation really can help people a ton. Most of the time, people will, have some follow-up questions just to make sure they're doing it right. And it really just varies on the circumstances of the case. Each person is different in terms of, how much they feel like they can handle or understand with the process. So I do, I have just a single consultation and then anything up from there.
Okay. I like that. And so if you're doing consultation, you're not going to court for them. Right. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. How many cases, I mean, I know it's kind of a huge guess and a big number, but how often do you think a divorce goes to court or really needs to go to court?
So, I think in general, about 2% of cases actually go to court. So not very many.
Not very many at all.
Right. Most of them settle, which is a good thing. I can't even imagine what our courts would look like if it was more than that, because they're already really busy.
Yeah.
So most of them settle. And honestly, if you can get a settlement, if you can agree or negotiate something or go through mediation, anything, short of court, it's really, in my opinion, that's the best way to go. You maintain more control over the process. You maintain more control about what your final agreement looks like. And you have more options about what that agreement looks like, because the court is really limited in what they can actually enter in terms of orders for you. And you can be a lot more creative when you're doing it on your own.
That's really interesting. So I forget who somebody was talking to the other day was phrasing it. They're like, do you want to make this decision about your future yourself, or do you want the government, right? Or really this one representative of the government to make all those choices for you? But that creativity piece, I think, is really interesting, right? Like, do you have any examples that come to mind of like, what is a more creative solution I could come up with if I mediate with my spouse, as opposed to options available to the judge?
Yeah. So, I think it probably happens more in parenting plans, just because family structures are so unique. And so there's so many different things that people might need. But there's certain things like, for instance, in families that really can't, when the parents can't communicate well, or they can't make decisions very easily together, or they struggle on certain decisions. One thing we do is we can have what's called a parenting coordinator and or a decision maker. So you might hear them referred to as a PCDM, parenting coordinator, decision maker. Those people, a parenting coordinator, the court can put into place if they have to make certain findings. They have to find that the parties haven't been able to implement their parenting plan on their own, that they're struggling with that. But the decision maker, which is actually the more helpful person, who for people who are really struggling, that person can't be appointed by the court. The parties have to agree to use them. And how a decision maker acts is basically like a judge, but they're a private person, and your process is much cheaper, much faster, and much more personalized. So that's just one example of things we can do. Just to make difficult situations as functional as you possibly can.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And in court, the judge has limited time, limited options, whereas in a settlement or a mediation, you've got more choice.
Yeah, and you have, when you go to court, if you are going to court to ask the judge to make the decision, you might have 2 hours to tell the judge about your whole life, your family, your money, and have that person make the decision. And so if you think about that, the judge does not have as much background information as you do. And they don't have the time to think through it all. They might miss pieces. And so it is not a first choice. It is absolutely a last resort.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's such a kind of an important thing to get people to think about, right? Like, because really putting it in that context, somebody's got 2 hours to look at your whole life and make choices about your future and your kids' future. And it does seem almost a little crazy to get to that point.
Right?
Yeah.
That is not your first choice.
This is not good.
Yeah.
Okay, so people are trying to avoid that. They're trying to settle. Tell me a little bit about mediation, Kelly, because you do a lot of mediation or more consulting. Kind of how many people choose that?
I do all of it, really. So every case that is filed is required to go to mediation before the court will hear it anyway. So whether I'm acting as the mediator or I'm with my client going to mediation, I do them all the time. That's the most common way that we settle. Most of the time when people are coming to attorneys, not always, but if they have a contested divorce, we really need mediation. So mediation, you have a neutral third-party mediator who has no authority. They're not binding. They can't make anybody do anything. It's a voluntary process. Even though the court makes you go, it's still voluntary in that you can choose to get an agreement or not.
Okay.
And so that person really is just trying to talk with each side and understand what the issues are and what areas they're having trouble getting to agreement on, and helps them sort of work through that and figure out a way to try to get the settlement like we were talking about and maintain a little more control and over the process. And that's really where you get creative, is when you're in mediation.
Okay.
Like, how can we overcome this obstacle? What's the best way to work around this issue? We can do unique, financial transfers, or if people own a business, how we're valuing that, or, getting money out, or whatever it may be. You can just do a lot more there.
And in mediation, like kind of back to this, can people kind of do these things on their own? If I'm going to mediation for my divorce, do I need to have a lawyer with me, or can me and my partner just say, okay, no, we're just going to go to mediation and do it that way?
Oh, no, you can absolutely go on your own. And a lot of people choose to do that. I mean, mediation is designed for people to be there on their own. The mediators, even though the mediator is oftentimes an attorney, they're not an advocate. So they can give information about, what they think a judge might do and that kind of thing, but they can't give personalized legal advice to either side. So that might be why you want your attorney there, to help you make a decision about what's going to be in your best interest. But I would say, the most of the time, people are on their own without an attorney.
Okay. And would you say, are there any kind of specific like red flags that you'd say, oh, you should definitely have an attorney with you in mediation? Like you need somebody on your team?
I think if there's a power imbalance,
okay.
If you feel like you either, weren't the income earner, or, there's just sort of the way you interact, there's a power imbalance, and you feel like you can't actually like just say what you want to say and have it be perceived properly, or not be attacked, or that kind of thing. Sometimes those people really will want an attorney, because it's easier to have someone there advocating for them. And also, if you have financial situations that you don't, sounds strange to say, but you don't fully understand. And so let me explain that. There's the way that the law deals with certain types of property in a divorce might be different than what the average person knows about. So even if you're really familiar with your pension or your para, or you're in the military, or you work for the federal government or the state government, you have pensions and deferred compensation and things like that are not as straightforward when it comes to dividing assets. So anything like that might be more nuanced, and you'll want to make sure aren't overlooked. You definitely want an attorney there, because you could be talking about thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in that case. And so, of course, it's going to be worth your time and money to have your attorney there with you.
Okay. And so, these cases are like really specific to Colorado too, right? Like you're a state or federal employee, you've got these state pension funds. Tell me, you do some work with people in that area, right? Is that
like government employees?
Like government employees and veterans, and can you give us? It sounds like you're kind of saying that anybody who has been a government employee should really have a lawyer at least advise them on those pensions.
Yeah, or if their spouse was a government employee, because I think it's actually, if your spouse was, you're not going to know some of the background things. So let me just give you an example.
Yeah.
So the state of Colorado has para, which is the pension and retirement in lieu of Social Security for state employees. Okay, so if you're a government employee for the state of Colorado, both you and the state of Colorado pay into para. You don't get Social Security, all right, because you're getting para. Now, the thing about para is they will give you a statement that says what the value is of it on a certain date, but that value is actually not the value when you're talking about marital property. And the reason is that, let's say you're 40 years old and your para, is worth $100,000 on paper. well, you're not retiring, okay, for like a minimum of 15 more years, because you can retire early when you have got enough years with para. But, obviously you're not retiring for some time. So the value of that today, if you were going to pay out your spouse, or if you were, going to get a payment, the value of receiving that money today is actually a portion of what the total retirement payout would be during a person's life. And then we discount that because a dollar today is worth more than waiting,
right,
to get that same dollar. So, so there's a calculation in there.
That's complicated.
It's complicated, and I would tell you that paras, are typically going to be like a minimum of 2 times whatever the face value is, but they're often much more than that, depending on the age of a person. We've used actuarial tables, and there's a discount factor, so all those things play into it. I've seen some that had face values of like 60,000, and when we got them valued, because we hire someone to do the valuation, it was like 500,000. Okay, so that's
huge.
It's huge, and if you are if you're the spouse of that person, you're potentially missing out on a huge asset. Now that only comes into play if parties are not wanting to just divide the retirement benefit equally when it's received.
Okay.
So you can choose to receive just a portion. It's called the marital portion. So whatever amount was acquired during the marriage, you would receive, 1/2 of that marital portion.
Yeah, there's a lot, right?
And so you don't have to get it valued if you're okay with doing that. But sometimes people don't want to have to do that. They'd rather just pay out some lump sum, or they have, other assets that they can offset that with. So there's some important pieces, and I do find it the most with, really pensions and deferred compensation. That's where that comes into play the most.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're a government employee, or you have any kind of pension coming out in the future, or your spouse does, you should talk to an attorney and at least find out how that impacts everything.
And I would say, like, corporate people who work for corporate as well, pensions are much more rare now than they used to be, but a lot of, particularly like executives or directors in larger corporations, are going to have executive compensation structures, stock options, all kinds of things like that require a more unique consideration.
Okay. Yeah. Kelly, have you ever seen a case where people just tried to do it on their own and said, okay, we're going to settle, we reached this agreement, but they've made pretty huge mistakes that they try to go back and undo, kind of in relation to all of this?
Yeah, I don't know if they're huge mistakes, but that's the thing about it. Little mistakes can
be huge, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The impact later on can be really sort of devastating or difficult. And I always say to people, doing it right the first time is way less expensive than trying to fix it later. So if you're even considering whether you need an attorney, you probably need to talk to somebody. So definitely and I will also say that once that sort of, I don't know if I call it a mistake, it's just a loophole or something that was missed, because they didn't know to think about it. Once that happens, it's a lot harder to fix things. We do all the time. It takes longer, it's just harder. So
more money, right? More expensive.
For making the investment in the beginning is a much better investment than trying to clean it up later.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And it sounds like for you, somebody can come in and say, Kelly, how much help do I need? Right? Is it enough to have you as a consultant and help me figure out these pieces, or do I really need representation that kind of goes the whole way? Is that right?
Yeah, and those options are flexible. It's not like once you choose one, you're on that, and
you're committed.
Certainly people start with full representation and then say, you know what, I think I can do this on my own. Maybe it wasn't as contested as they thought, or and so we change it, or vice versa. So yeah, it's all flexible.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, if you're even asking the question, should I have a lawyer? You should at least talk to one
Yeah.
and then go from there.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Kelly, I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about some of the emotional stuff happening with these divorce cases. Because before you were a lawyer, you worked in the domestic violence arena, right?
Hmm.
Can you tell us just a little bit about your background there?
Yeah. So, I worked in child advocacy and also domestic violence. So, I actually worked in a shelter. So, and I was a children's counselor there. So I worked a lot, obviously, with women and children who were immediately fleeing violent situations. But I was also active on a state level, on a local and state level, in like the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence,
Okay.
working on public policy issues. And actually, one of the reasons I got into law is because I felt like I had sort of frontline experience with how legislation and other things were impacting people and their lives. Because domestic violence is a really complicated issue. I think as any of us, we all know, like relationships are unique and complicated. And there's a lot behind them. And domestic violence is not just physical violence. There's power and control structures, and there's psychological abuse and financial abuse and all kinds of different um, areas where people are um, you know victimized and suffering and challenged.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, how, tell me how that's affected your practice of family law, right? Because I would imagine whether it's domestic violence or not, that element of complication, of financial abuse, of emotional abuse, of power imbalances really shows up in your office a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. You know, it, I would say a lot of, I think the most common one, actually, I don't even know if that's true. Psychological abuse and financial abuse, I think, are the most common when I see them. Because particularly if one person is a much larger income earner or the only income earner, a lot of the time they're, generous and good partners and all those things, but I'm not always seeing those people because they're not the ones getting a divorce, right? So
Right.
there's some sort of fatal flaw in there. And if somebody is trying to, sort of regain some control or punish the other person, they will use the money to do that, and so on my end, I'm always just looking at how can we change this dynamic, right? Like what can we put in place to change this dynamic? And I am not a counselor, or a therapist. Like that's what you are so fantastic to have available. But I have, and I have the tools that I have, and courts have the tools they have to help people sort of deal with and modify those dynamics as best we can.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to put it, right? Like you're really focused on the goal. How do we shift this dynamic to reach an agreement that's fair and makes sense? And,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And functional. I mean, if you don't have kids, then we don't have to look at at the how you're going to interact in the future. But we might have to look at, what's your financial future, right? So there's all kinds of different considerations in there.
Yeah, I mean, everything gets more complicated when there's kids involved, right? Because you really, yes, you're splitting up, but you're still all going forward together, right? I still have to deal with this person now,
right?
Throughout the rest of my kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I should say, when there's kids involved, we want to make the parents be able to interact as best they can for the sake of the kids, because the kids know it's all happening, whether they see it or not. Like they know, they see, they feel the energy. And so, I use, my experience and the tools that I know about that can be successful to try to create realities that are best, not only for the parents, but are going to have the least, impact on the kids.
And that makes a lot of sense too, that you almost, when there's kids involved, it's less important to maybe win financially than to come to some conclusion that's fair and feels like a fair compromise to both parties so that you don't hate each other, so that you can continue to have a relationship for your kids.
Well, yeah, and that idea of winning, it's just like, it's not really a thing when you're going through a divorce or you have, custody disputes or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a win, and I think that people have to understand that. Like, you are taking a family structure and dividing it into two, and that's going to have an impact, financial impact, emotional impact, a time impact if you have kids and they're transferring back and forth and that kind of thing. And so, I think the only way to actually get to a place where you feel like you went through it well is to understand that and understand your life is going to change. You're going to have less money. Like, both people are going to end up having less money because you're dividing a household that had, it was one household and now it's two, and that's just more expensive.
Right. Yeah. There's one mortgage and now there's two. There was,
Exactly. And so I think if you just understand that and can sort of deal with that, and understand the idea that you might have to give up some money, whether you're giving up getting as much as you thought you would be getting, or you're giving up money that you have that you didn't necessarily want to give up. If you go in understanding that there is going to be a change, I think that's where the win comes. But there's really just, I don't know if I've ever talked to anyone who felt like they won their divorce. That's just, it's different from civil litigation or personal injury suits or whatever, where there is a winner and a loser.
Yeah.
It's just, how can we make the best situation and the best future going forward?
Do you feel like people come in with the idea that they could win, but then at the end they're like, oh yeah, okay, this isn't really, or do you think that's not, I don't know, is that a misconception that people have about divorce?
I don't know if they actually call it like, I want to win. But I think they come in with ideas about what it's going to look like and what their life is going to look like coming out.
Yeah.
And sometimes they feel really strongly about that. And honestly, that's part of my job, is to help them understand that, we can try to get them what they want, but they also have to understand that they're going to probably not get everything they want. And I will tell you, like, pretty much 100%, if you go to court, you're not going to be getting everything you want. You might get what you want, but you're going to miss something. So, there's no, I don't think people, no, I think they do. I think they come in with strong ideas, and that's part of my job, is helping them understand how this process works and what it looks like and what reasonable, what the expectations should be, because setting up your expectations is really the key to feeling successful in the process.
Yeah, I mean, there's really an element of counseling or coaching, right, in what you're doing, because to be successful at your job, you've really got to manage people's expectations. And yeah, they're coming in and I'm going to get this and I'm going to get that and I'm going to keep this much money and da da da. And you're like, well, let's really think about what's a realistic view of the future. What are we really working towards? And what's really important, right? Is it the kids? Is it?
Yeah. Well, and on the flip side of that, people who are just really emotionally devastated. I have to be able to deal, to be understanding of that, and manage that piece while also, trying to bring them through the process. And, that's actually one of the things that's really rewarding for me, is watching somebody who comes into my office in the beginning, who is just feeling really, disempowered, and, they're just really emotionally distraught, and watching them get empowered and feel stronger and, know that they can do it and they'll be fine. But yeah, I mean, definitely, I always say to people, if your attorney can't, manage the emotional piece and understand and accept that piece and help you through the legal piece, you're really missing a huge part of your representation, because they're not separate. I mean, even if you're ready for your divorce and it's the right thing, and you and your partner are, on the same page about it, it's still a loss. It's still a huge life change. So, even if you think that it's going to be super easy, I think there's still an emotional component for everybody.
Yeah, no, that's, I think, a really important thing to say, what you just said, that they're not separate, right? Going through this legal process and your emotional process, they're going to happen together and they're going to get messily crossed up and mixed into each other.
Yep.
I like that perspective too, though. Sometimes it's kind of managing people's expectations down that, you know, this is kind of a messy process, but sometimes it's also managing them up. Like, you know, you can get through this and look where we can go and what is possible for you. And
right. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How about mental health issues in divorce cases? Is that something that you see coming up a lot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a ton. And all kinds of various issues. And, you know, sometimes it's with the kids, sometimes it's with one parent, sometimes it's with both parents. And it's not necessarily that they've got a diagnosis or even would qualify for a diagnosis. Oftentimes it's just certain personality traits, that just really don't work together and make things really challenging. And, you know, I think as an attorney, we started out talking about who can do it on their own. And I think, people who can, even though they've decided their relationship is over, they can come to agreements and decide what's in the best interest of the children. And,
right.
All those things, those aren't the cases I see, right? So I see the cases that have more, the stronger conflicting personality traits, if not mental health issues. So, I would a high percentage.
High percentage.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like there's kind of another gauge for, is this something I should do on my own or not, right? Is there this kind of personality disconnect or strong personality or maybe underlying mental health issue that's going to make it harder for us to work things out between us?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And it's hard though. I mean, I think I was going to say that I think if that's the case, but not necessarily. I think you just know if you can have a reasonable conversation with your spouse or not, and it doesn't just, and I deal with more than just divorce. So people who are never married that have children together.
Okay.
So, those are relationships too, right?
Yeah.
A child.
They're families. Yeah,
absolutely. At one point. So we might not be doing the divorce process, but we are still trying to manage co-parenting. So.
Do those cases, is mediation something that's available to people in that situation as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, mediation is available for any issue. I mean, so, my specialty as a lawyer is family law and, divorce, adoption, parenting plans, that kind of thing. But I also, I mediate all kinds of issues. So, small business disputes, like neighbor disputes, really, anything. So mediation is good. It's a settlement negotiation. So if you have a problem with another person that needs to get solved, mediation is a great option.
That's it. I mean, is it something like if you wanted mediation for a smaller thing that, isn't a divorce, or if it is just a business dispute or something, do you have to go through the courts and file some kind of lawsuit or something, or can you just call could somebody just call you and say, Kelly, we need a mediator?
Yeah. So for a non-divorce case, yeah.
Yeah, for a non-divorce case.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to file a case against someone. In fact, you only do it if you can't get a settlement. So there's most of the time, people bring the issue to, either the company or the person, and then we'll go to mediation to try to work it out. If mediation fails, that's when you file to, pursue litigation and file a case with the court.
Interesting. There's it's kind of an interesting thing to just have as like the option out there, right? For more than just divorce.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, what do you think is the most important piece of advice that you would want to give somebody who's getting divorced, thinking about getting divorced, starting the process?
Yeah. Information is power. So, like I was saying before, every time I do a consultation, people come in really freaked out, or maybe even with their own, maybe not freaked out, but with their own ideas about how everything's going to work.
Yeah. And
they leave with more information about what the process looks like, what they need to plan for, what the expectations are. And I mean, 95% of the time, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Thank you. Like, I know what to look for and, what's going to happen. And so getting information, whether it's from an attorney or go to the pro se clinics, or there's, various free or low cost options out there. But I think it's a really, really good use of your time and money to talk to an attorney, even if it's just for 30 minutes or an hour to get that, to get the information.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a powerful thing for people to hear, Kelly, right? Because you think of like getting a lawyer for your divorce, and I think of hours and hours and retainers and lots of money. But from what you've said, it sounds like it can be so powerful to have, that 30 minutes or 60 minutes of personal advice about my circumstances, and whether I ever use a lawyer again, the information I gain there is maybe a lot more valuable than what I can learn from the court website or from going to these free services, because it's specific to my case.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it doesn't, you can get a big chunk of that information without committing to a long
thousands of dollars.
Yeah, thousands and thousands of dollars, exactly. Yep. Okay, great. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. And if somebody would like to use you as a mediator or a consultant, or even for the whole process of their divorce, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, so our website is snodgrassfamilylaw.com.
Okay.
And they can get tons of information there. They can contact us, email us, phone numbers there. So that's the best way to find us.
Perfect. Well, I will put everything in the video description below. So if you guys want to reach out to Kelly, you can find all of her contact information in the description. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like I learned a lot.
Yeah, great being here. Thanks for having me.